was younger, I remember entering the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in a family trip to London. I was blown away by the weird and wonderful displays that Ripley's was famous for. But as I got to the back of the museum, tucked away in the history section, I saw a glass box with 3 heads from South America. Real, human, shrunken heads.
Hi there, welcome to Adventure. Eastern Ecuador live some of the most extraordinary primitive people.
It's kind of like a human instinct that there are some things that we're all drawn to. You know, we're fascinated by death.
Supposedly we're bringing all cultures of the world under one roof.
The shrinking of a human head.
Sanses are artifacts made by the Shuar people of the Amazon rainforest as a way to trap vengeful souls. They were made by the removing of the skull and the sewing up of the eyes and the mouth, to prevent the soul from escaping. Then the head would be boiled and ironed, removing any water present in the skin, causing it to shrink. After this, they would be filled up with hot stones and sand to dry the skin further and keep the shape of the head.
So, what do we know about these Sanses? It felt like there was so much to know about this topic and our curiosity just kept on growing. We were surprised to find out that Ripley's Believe It or Not is the biggest collector of Sanses in the world, so we thought this would be a good place to start. Robert Ripley started his collection as a freak show in the beginning half of the 20th century, so we wanted to find out how far the collection had come. Mikkel from Ripley's in Copenhagen tried to explain to us why certain ancient relics attract so much attention and why we are naturally drawn to the macabre.
So we are a place where people come to be entertained by weird and strange and bizarre and sometimes scary and fun, tongue-in-cheek artifacts. I think the company has the largest collection of shrunken heads in the world. And it's a classic Ripley exhibit. It's one of the things that all attractions have shrunken heads. It's bizarre, it's weird that this actually used to be a human head, a human being. I think that that is kind of like a human instinct, that there are some things that we're all drawn to for different reasons. And I think death is one of them. You need to be more and more careful with how you're presenting things and how you talk about certain things, including many of our exhibits. But I kind of feel that it's two different debates. There's one about who does the stuff belong to. Another thing is, how are you respectful to deceased people when you put them on display? Of course, you should pay respect to the dead and all that, but you can also go too far and become afraid of it.
We agreed with Mikkel that there was a debate surrounding what to do with colonial artefacts, so we wanted alternative opinions. With that in mind, we decided to also talk to some British museums to find out some more.
The first of these was the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, as they had just been in the public eye due to their recent decision to remove all human remains displays from their museum, including their collection of Sanses. In a webinar, Dr. Laura van Broekhoven discusses the ethics and the historical basis for their decision.
Reimagine what the future might be for museums like ours. When I say that museum like ours, I mean museums that have deep roots in coloniality, with collections that were collected during the height of the British Empire.
When the British Empire made it to South America, they were intrigued by the Sanses and would trade with the locals for the heads. They left behind grass and cows. This is what started the real problem for the Shuar. The sudden influx of cattle meant the pigs decreased in value, meaning the only thing they had left to trade was the Sanses. And while missionaries would give them supplies like food, they refused to trade in arms. The colonists were happy to trade in guns and gunpowder, and this created a black market of sorts, with the Sanses being the only currency they could use, and tools of violence being their only reward.
This has largely been on the grounds that human remains from societies are acquired by museums, often under conditions of unequal power, during a time of colonial rule, and in some cases against the will of community members.
Displaying the Sanses within the context of rituals wasn't considered disrespectful by the Shuar and Anishuar within their communities.
Some Shuar felt that the shrunken heads should never be exhibited, that they should be stored away from other objects. The Sanses were sacred objects containing the soul of the captured person and required special handling and prayer.
But colonists often didn't handle them with care. When Santas were brought back to England and shown in Victorian freak shows, sold in auctions or held in private collections, the colonial perspective of the Shuar was brought back with them.
Some of those practices that underlie our displays and collecting were those of social evolutionism, that ranked societies from savage to barbarous to civilized, where civilization was sort of the top of an evolutionary process that societies would go through. I think that is where museums like ours are obviously, that was what we used to do. We were the ones who would collect, go out and collect, and then put it on display through our lenses so that we can explain how others are.
What we wanted to do with the Census Project was actually to evaluate the way these remains have been shown in different museums, and through a very collaborative and interdisciplinary approach that involves biologists, anthropologists, and the most important part, the community, we wanted to discuss the role of these human remains in our museum collections.
The removal of the Santas has been done in order that the museum has time and space to consult with the communities that they belong to. Displaying them in museums today for audiences that are mostly British does raise several issues.
For starters, the exhibits make it easy for people to misunderstand and misrepresent other cultures, which can cause them to be seen as less advanced or inferior. We also have the problem that they are no longer representative of the Shuar people and used as an educational tool, so they have lost their value in this sense. The final and most significant issue regarding human remains is who they belong to and whether they should be displayed at all.
There was quite a bit of concern from the Shuar of being displayed in a way that actually was not leading to any mutual understanding or any better understanding. What they were experiencing, for example, was saying that, what we notice is people will come to our towns and they will say, oh yes, you're those murderers, you're those people who cut off people's heads and you shrink them. And that whole stereotype of the Shuar being very violent is a very typical stereotype that in our display was very much not countering any of that. It was also not telling a more completer story about how these objects ended up in our collections.
Museums have faced justifiable criticism from Indigenous communities for not representing them in a balanced way and not allowing community members to speak for themselves.
We've fallen out of love with the old extractive practices of appropriating others, appropriating things, and representing others through lenses that are far from scientific.
Self-representation for people with the lived experience of the objects in the Pitt Rivers collection is a massive part of what we do and what we hold dear, because they are the people who should be choosing the stories that are told about those objects and about themselves.
After the expedition into colonial roots of Santas, we all feel like we've learnt something important.
We now know why there's such a big debate surrounding these artifacts, and why the Shuar people may want some returned.
Possibly most important of all is that we've learnt that a lot of what we see in our museums has got a dark history, and this is something that we all have a responsibility to learn about.
And we know that it is that richness, that diversity, that makes all at the same time, and that pluriverse cannot be told through one perspective, and it cannot be studied through one perspective.
Drunken Heads or not, this is so long ago that our opinion about it is not going to change anything for these poor people. But we could focus, channel our energy into what is happening right now to change it for tomorrow.
Because if we are to be an institution that deeply cares for people as much as for the things that they make, and if we were an institution that aims to undo epistemicide, then what avenues might there be that we could explore?
And talking to you guys have actually made me think maybe we should rethink the Drunken Heads.
And again, this is constant discussion of how to take back the narrative and talk about everything else that make the Shuar, and not just the Census.